Yeah, first of all, I, I think I'm very glad to be reconnecting with regards to this book and my contribution in it. So I want to thank Rachna, Mehra, and Anita for organizing this. I don't frankly remember Sandeep or Nidhi from the conference. That was in 2013. But I do remember most of the other participants. So I would like to actually retrace the history of my contribution, maybe 5 minutes or so. Then I'll talk about something new. And Anita, please stop me because I think
Yeah.
I will go beyond 15 minutes
Yes.
otherwise. So I think it's a kind of important to document the history of ideas, and it is also nice to begin with something personal, because for me, the personal is the intellectual. And I want to relate here just to also to justify the faith and kind of confidence that my dear friend Anita has shown in this particular work of mine. So this revisiting of this notion of, I called it estrangement in the chapter. I think it's chapter 5 of the book, but I'm calling it abeyance. In fact, I wanted to call it abeyance for quite a long time, but I was not sure. Even now, I'm not sure, but I will switch because I have got new ideas. And also, clearly, this is revisiting AUD because the conference was held in August 2013.
Yeah.
Anita organized it. One of the first things that she did over there, where I explored this originally this idea, which I then later wrote up in the chapter. And this idea was actually circulating in my mind, and I was finding expressions in odd ways. And the one that I want to highlight here today is in forming of a collective, which was then called SIGDSU, that is Special Interest Group in Disability Studies at the universities. And that happened in May 2012. Kind of important. And because this date was significant in the sense that this collective was formed right after the reconstitution of the Equal Opportunity Cell Committee of the University of Delhi. Because one fine day, our then new Vice Chancellor decided to reconstitute the committee, because I guess every head of institution wants to do something new, and if they can't do anything constructive, they can always and destroy something, or in fact, as we see now, do nothing about anything. So this is the short history of the idea which was circulating in my mind. And before that, my work at the Equal Opportunity Cell, at that time I was the coordinator of Equal Opportunity Cell of Delhi University, was in many ways was an attempt, and many of you here know about this. You had graduated from the courses I was teaching, you've been part of the committee, etc. It was an attempt to infuse some kind of component of knowledge into what is predominantly, I still believe, a service-oriented enterprise. Disability activities in our country is dominantly a service-oriented enterprise. The UGC mandate itself, in fact, makes it very clear for setting up equal opportunity cells at the universities. So it was not surprising to create a collective where we can establish a kind of dominance of knowledge for once over service. And those who want to know more about this period and my role in it may refer to a recent paper, Service and Knowledge, the Emergence of Disability Studies Extension. This was published in Nilika Mehrotra's edited recent book, 2020, this year, early this year, I think in January or February, Disability Studies in India, which was sort of documentation of this period and how important it was. And the title of the article itself, Knowledge and Service, tells you briefly my position there, and also in Anita's paper and what I'm going to say today. So then, anyway, Anita decided to publish this book, and I think the work began in 2017, and It was, as she said, published in 2018, which I want to make a comment because I think it's very important in the state of publishing disability literature in India. This was really one of the speediest, fastest publication, and the editor worked tirelessly, as she just told us, for this, and it was a beautiful result as compared to other experiences that I've had with other books which took like 5 6 years to publish, and one which I know this a big paper of mine which I presented in 2014 in a history congress at an important history congress in University of Delhi. Anita was there also, Renu was there, and it is yet to be published from Orient. Black Swan. So this is just a comment, and I was already in the next stage of thinking when I was asked to write this paper up, somewhat away from the mainstream disability studies ideas at that time, in terms of my thinking and also our collective, and which was then sort of remolded in critical disability studies frame. And this move was formally reflected in fact, in renaming of the group from SIG DSU, and thereby redefining our collective as CDSI in March 2018. So it's Critical Disability Studies in India. There were other incidents that worked as a catalyst for this move, which I'll not talk about today here, but will be available in print very soon. So this paper was published as chapter 5 of the book, as I said earlier. Not only did it cast the content in a broadly, CDS frame, critical disability studies frame, but also included an integration of disability justice, which is another new framework. Not many people in India are involved in it, which is, currently the work that some of us in the group are engaged in. This was a early sort of inclusion or integration of disability justice ideas within critical disability studies broadly in the academics of disability in India is broadly, disability studies. Now we're here, 28th of October, 2020, interested in sort of recasting and extending, time permitting, the concept of this abeyance or estrangement. I'm not very keen to repeat what I have already written in the chapter because that's available for anyone to consult, but rather try and sort of redefine or refine, abeyance in the context of disability studies in general. I'll speak for maybe 10 minutes now how I will do it. Those who contributed to the volume may remember, I don't know if you have forgotten, the central theme of the conference was in fact subjectivity. And that is where I begin my recasting of this abeyance model. So the question before me and before us is how, post-human subjectivity is to be understood, as famously stated in Braidothi's book, 2013, that post-human is also post-humanities, since humanities has always been sort of inherently anthropocentric, and this is something which touches many of us who are into humanities and social sciences, of the state of knowledge in these disciplines, where departments are closing down, etc. And in this uncertain sort of ontological state of the crisis of subjectivity, you could say, the state of the fallen man or whatever, the word man is important there in the ideas. This have We have to reimagine sort of ourselves, our identities, ourselves, and our roles in new ways of sort of becoming or being in the world. And Nietzsche, in fact, already had reimagined two critical tasks for philosophy, at least, which is one is to develop critical thought, and the second is to reconstitute a sense of community. So as I'll pick on this and try to connect my work with that. As post-human academics, I think it is also our task to continue to engage in different communities of learning. So this community building exercise is something which I take seriously when we come to our a role in academics in general, and especially with fields like disability studies, gender studies, Dalit studies, etc. we must pursue and sort of reassociate or regroup with newer communities or groups to help shape the kind of world that we actually want to see ourselves living in, and the kind of knowledge structures that we want to reflect upon. And I think this is an ethical accountability. There is an ethical sort of accountability for this community building exercise. But how should this effort look like? That is where I pause, and the sort of new thinking, integrating some old ideas struck me. What should be the strategy, or what should be the plan, or in fact, what should be the dream? This is also something which came up in our. We have a little group in WhatsApp, and somebody, I think Samir, asked something about utopia or mentioned that, and I started thinking about that, and um, one thing led to another. But I think this is what I mean by the word terrain in today's title of the talk that Anita read out, terrain of disability studies. Those who are familiar with these ideas will have remembered this word terrain comes often in the prison notebooks of Gramsci, in fact. Okay, and so it's quite significant for my formalism also, that whatever I'm presenting today, and I'm inspired by this, Gramscian view of ideology, which considers, ideology as a kind of terrain of practices, principles, and dogmas having some kind of material or institutional nature, which constitute, of course, individual subjects once these subjects are part of this terrain. But what struck me is the concept of terrain. Um, and I used my sort of linguistic knowledge here, which I often do. Gramsci seems to sort of carry, for Gramsci, it seems to carry sort of two meanings of the word terrain. One is, of course, all of us share this meaning, I think, of a geographical expanse or stretch of land. We often use the word terrain for that. And the other is a restricted use, but I'm sure many of us are familiar with that also, field of knowledge or interest. So these two broad meanings are there of the word terrain. Now, as a linguist, I see another meaning emerging from the same root. The root is actually the Latin root terra. Again, something which many of you are familiar. Those who are into some serious post-structuralist studies would know that this is related to terrain, or the earth, right? Terra is earth in that sense. And by Middle English, you had this word which is kind of archaic now, terrene. Nobody says that, but it means that the world of secular and not spiritual. So secular versus spiritual. Secular is one which is earthly, belonging to the earth, that your thinking is sort of grounded. And that is how I started thinking of utopia. Can utopia be grounded? So that kind of thing. So this semantics is not necessarily in consonance with the general nuance of ideology. When you use the word ideology loosely, not in the political sense, we don't really mean it to be grounded or earthly or practical and things like that. And some would say, in fact, it goes against the notion of ideology. However, I think it does provide a more holistic understanding of the Gramscian notion of ideology. It's a metaphoric stretch of land. So this is my definition. It's a metaphoric stretch of land dotted with, paraphernalia listed. Already I talked about those practices, etc., dogmas, as well as it coheres with some kind of field of knowledge, which nonetheless emerges from the earth, that is of the world and therefore secular, rather than of a notion of utopia or radical dream, which I equate with being spiritual. So this is my sort of idea of ideology, and that ideology is this thing hovering over us, and we kind of plug into it. I won't have time to develop it too far. I'll just end with some comments about, at a very crude level, what my paper did in 2018 book was to distinguish between sort of activism and, well, I said activism and knowledge, and activism I'm equated in Nilika's book with service. But at a very crude level, it sort of reenacts the history of ideas of intellectualism, especially among, let's say, Lenin and Gramsci. As many of you know, this is the difference between, let's say, a worker and an intellectual. And Lenin famous call for revolution basically obliterated this, because he wanted the revolutionary party, whether vanguard or mass based, to actually take care of the ideology and the intellectual force of the workers. But Gramsci famously reworked this intellectual and their function, working, in fact, from different directions. So very crucially, Lenin called it the problem of the intellectual, and Gramsci, if I'm not mistaken, called it the problem of the worker. So this is, approaching this from different directions. They don't necessarily diverge too much, and we don't have to discuss that. But Gramsci distinguished general traditional intelligentsia, by which generally people understand intellectuals as a class. He definitely showed the historicity of this concept of intellectualism is definitely class based. It's not a separate class. However, the intellectuals may pretend to be a classless, grouping, but it is very classed. So, but he suggested that he didn't disband it like Lenin did. He, in fact, said, let's rework on the proletariat and call for a class-oriented new intellectualism emerging from its own social group, where different strata of intellectuals together with itself are created, which is kind of important. And finally, I would say that, Gramsci furthers the proposal that social hegemony, which is the big concept in Gramscian Marxism, of any social group depends really on assimilating and conquering the ideology of the traditional intellect. But this more efficient and, in fact, quicker if the group itself develops its own organic intellectuals first. I think I'll stop here. I won't really try to show how it connects to my paper and my new idea, but you will understand, you'll get the drift of it, that this organic individuals, development of organic intellectuals is, I don't think it's complete as far as disability studies is concerned in our country.